We'll go to Georgia now, where polls across Georgia will open next hour for the state's highly anticipated Senate runoff election between incumbent Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker. Before any ballots are even cast today, Senator Warnock already has momentum thanks to a sizable early vote lead, as well as several recent polls showing a 4 to 5 point edge. Walker now has to rely on strong Election Day turnout to win the Senate seat. Word is it's raining there. Both candidates spent the final campaign day yesterday barnstorming the state, making a final case to voters and pushing supporters to the ballot box.
And I want to say this is about turnout. This is about turnout, and now that means that we got to get in the game, and we can't sit on the sideline anymore. Because if we sit on the sideline, y'all see what we're going to get. We're going to get people that you can't trust anymore. Get your friends to vote. Call your friends to vote. This is so important. And I say this, if you don't have friends, what do you need to do? Make some friends and get them out to vote.
Listen, the people of Georgia are showing up. And I think it's because they understand how much is at stake. We've seen record voter turnout day after day after day. But here's the thing. I want people to understand that although we're seeing record voter turnout during this early voting period that ended Friday, we need people to show up again tomorrow. Given my opponent, this race is not even about Republican versus Democrat, red versus blue, right versus left. It's right versus wrong. And I think people see that.
Both candidates speaking yesterday in Georgia. Let's go right over to the big board where NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki is standing by. So, Steve, we've got record early voting in this race, which has big implications for what happens today. And it looks like Herschel Walker is going to need to have a big day to make up for some of what we've seen in the early voting.
Yeah, and I should say, in recent elections, we've seen plenty of examples here where, one party, generally the Democrats, seems to have a strong advantage in the early vote. And we come into Election Day saying, hey, the Republicans need to pull a rabbit out of the hat here. And they do in terms of getting the turnout that they need. So just to give you a sense of what it is Republicans need today, here is what the early and mail vote total was in the general election in Georgia. It's about 2.5 million in the general. And actually, it's going to fall short of 2 million here for the runoff. Remember, this is a truncated period. They had like 9 weeks of early voting before the general election, a much shorter period here because of the condensed nature of the runoff. So while you were seeing these extremely high single-day totals for the early vote, that's what's been making the headlines. When you add it all together, it is short of the 2022 general number. It still is nearly 2 million voters. That is a big number for a runoff. And if you just look at the composition here, this is the 2022 general election. This is the entire electorate, same-day, mail, early, all combined together. And this is what the runoff electorate so far has looked like. And I think one thing that stands out here is a higher share of the electorate African-American in the runoff, not just compared to the general election, but that would also be true if you compared it to the early voting period ahead of the general election. And I think when Democrats say that they're excited about what they're seeing in the early voting numbers, I think that is specifically what they're talking about, because if there was some weakness for them in that Senate race in November, while Warnock did finish ahead of Walker, black turnout was low in Georgia relative to previous midterm elections. In the last runoff, after the 2020 presidential election, when Warnock first got elected, we saw Democrats successfully increase black turnout between the general election and the runoff. That's something they're trying to pull off again today. And again, the early voting data suggests it's possible that they've done that. If they have, what that means, obviously, is it just intensifies the need for Walker, for Republicans to really turn out the vote in some of their core areas here. And if you look, where do Republicans get their most votes in Georgia, their biggest margins? You look in the sort of the fringes of the Atlanta metro area. So a place like Forsyth County, this is a core Republican county. This is the second biggest Republican plurality producing county in Georgia. And just take a look here. You saw something in Forsyth County in November that was true statewide, but it was particularly true in these core Republican counties. Here in the Senate race, Walker beat Warnock in Forsyth County by a 2-to-1 margin, healthy margin, about 33,000 votes and change right there. But compare that to how Brian Kemp did in this same county in the governor's race. He won it by 46 points. He got a margin of nearly 50,000 votes out of Forsyth County. So we saw this in county after county. The electorate that turned out in the November general election statewide in Georgia was actually a very Republican-friendly electorate. Joe Biden's approval rating with Georgia voters in November was only 41%. Republicans won the other statewide contest. Kemp won the governor's race fairly easily. On paper, it was the kind of electorate that you think would elect a Republican senator, but it clearly had reservations about Herschel Walker, and you saw this in county after county. Forsyth is a good example. You could go next door to Cherokee County. Similar gap there. Kemp won it by 50. Walker won it by under 40. Walker underperforming, Kemp underperforming the rest of the Republicans running statewide in Georgia. So what the Republicans will tell you is, hey, what's different here in the runoff than in the general election? They'll say it's that Kemp has been actively involved in Walker's campaign this time around. There was distance between them clearly in the general election. They say Kemp's on board now, and what that's going to mean is when you look at a Forsyth County, when you look at a Cherokee County, when you look at a Fayette County, that's another one we're going to be talking about south of Atlanta tonight, you're going to see Walker numbers that get closer to, probably won't reach, but get closer to the Kemp level. If he can improve, if Walker in a place like Cherokee County is north of 70%, that could make all difference. So Republicans need turnout here. They need those voters who voted for Kemp but not for Walker. They need them, A, to turn out, and then B, to actually cast ballots for Walker this time. That's good. You need a lot of that to offset what the Democrats have done in the early vote.
So